Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into a huge period of global movement, specifically the years between 1750 and 1900.
Mm-hmm. A really transformative era.
Absolutely. We've gone through some great historical analysis looking at the big migration patterns then and, what was really driving them.
Right. The goal is to sort of pull out the main reasons, environmental, technological, economic, why so many people were moving, crossing borders, or even moving within them.
Exactly. We want to understand those connections, maybe find some surprising links, the human stories behind it all, but without getting totally lost in, endless detail.
Yeah, keep it focused. And the backdrop to all of this really is the Industrial Revolution. It reshaped so much, including why and how people moved.
Definitely. The materials we looked at make it clear these factors weren't separate. They all kind of weave together.
Interconnected, absolutely.
Okay, so let's start with the environmental factors. You might first think migration is all about jobs, right? But the analysis points to some big environmental pressures first.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the most basic ones was just population growth, a massive global boom.
Especially in Europe, wasn't it?
Yes, particularly in the 19th century. The sources highlight between 1850 and 1914, Europe's population just exploded.
Why was that?
Well, advancements in medicine played a part, and also more varied diets. People were living longer.
Ah, okay. So longer lifespans plus still high birth rates.
Exactly. It led to much larger populations, especially out in the rural areas, and this happened even before industrialization really kicked into high gear everywhere.
Right. And then industrialization does arrive,
Yeah.
and it changes farming.
Mechanization. Fewer people needed on the farms to produce the same amount of food or even more.
So you've got more people in the countryside, but fewer jobs for them. That sounds like a tough situation.
It really was. It created a significant push factor, as the analysis calls it. Growing rural poverty forced people to look elsewhere.
And elsewhere usually meant the cities.
Predominantly, yes. Urban centers were expanding rapidly with all the new industrial jobs. So that became the pull factor, the promise of work in factories.
So it's a push from the countryside, lack of opportunity, and a pull towards the cities, the hope of finding work.
A classic migration pattern, really, fueled by these twin forces.
But it wasn't just about population density and job markets, was it? The sources talk about actual environmental disasters, too.
Oh, definitely. Regions that hadn't industrialized, relying on what the sources call primitive agriculture, well, they were incredibly vulnerable.
Primitive agriculture meaning.
Often relying heavily on just one or two crops, maybe lacking advanced irrigation, good storage, things like that. It made them susceptible to famine if something went wrong with that main crop.
Okay, and the prime example here is the Irish potato famine.
The Great Hunger, yes. Between 1845 and 1852, it's a really stark case.
The potato, which came over during the Columbian Exchange.
Exactly. It had become the absolute staple food for the Irish poor, their main source of calories.
So when the blight hit,
A plant disease, yeah. It wiped out the potato crops. The consequences were just devastating, widespread starvation.
millions died, didn't they?
Millions. And for those who survived, leaving was often the only option. Mass emigration followed.
Where do they mainly go?
A huge number went to the United States, particularly to the cities. It shows just how dramatically an environmental catastrophe tied to agriculture could trigger mass movement.
Such a tragic example. Okay, so we have these environmental push factors, population pressure, famine, but the analysis also stresses that while maybe the reasons to move weren't entirely new, the ability to move on such a massive scale that was new in this period,
That's a crucial distinction. Technology changed the equation.
specifically transportation.
Yes, new and importantly, cheaper transportation. We're talking railroads and steamships.
Right. Suddenly getting from A to B, whether it was within a country or across an ocean, became much easier, faster, and more affordable.
It fundamentally altered the possibilities. It made both internal migration, say, from rural areas to cities, and international migration much more feasible for many more people.
And this fueled that incredible urbanization we mentioned. Sources talk about some European cities growing by like 1,000%.
It's almost unimaginable growth. Huge concentrations of people moving into urban centers, both in the imperial heartlands and in colonial territories.
And these new technologies, the steamships especially, they also affected whether people stayed permanently, didn't they?
That's an interesting point from the analysis, yes. While many migrants never returned home, the speed and lower cost of steam travel allowed for more flexibility. Some people could work abroad for a while and then go back, or even travel back and forth.
Let's look at some examples. The sources mention Japanese agricultural workers in the Pacific.
Right. So late 19th, early 20th century, there was economic hardship in Japan pushing agricultural workers out.
Where do they go?
Places like Hawaii, California,
Oh,
working on sugar, fruit plantations. But the key thing here, linked to technology, is return migration.
because of the steamships.
Exactly. Steamships made the journey back possible. So as wages eventually started to rise a bit in Japan and communication improved, a fair number of these workers actually returned home after saving some money. It wasn't always a permanent move.
Interesting. Okay, what about the Lebanese merchants in the Americas?
Similar time frame, late 19th, early 20th century. They were migrating mainly to places like Argentina and Brazil.
Why were they leaving?
A mix of things. Economic opportunity was a big one, but also escaping religious persecution within the Ottoman Empire.
And again, return migration was a factor.
Yes, the sources note relatively high rates of return. Regular steamship traffic made it feasible for many to go back after a period.
Suggests maybe a strategy of temporary migration for some. And the third example, Italian industrial workers in Argentina.
A huge wave of Italians, especially from poor southern Italy, went to Argentina seeking work in its booming industries.
And the connection back home remains strong.
Very much so. The established transatlantic steamship routes helped, plus strong Italian communities formed in Argentina. This facilitated keeping ties and even traveling back and forth for some.
It really drives home how technology didn't just cause migration, but shaped how it happened, the patterns of it.
Absolutely. It enabled responses to hardship and opportunity on a scale that just wasn't possible before.
Okay, so let's pivot fully to the economic drivers now. The analysis really drums home the theme of migration for work.
It's central, definitely. A huge amount of the movement was voluntary migration, people actively seeking better economic prospects.
We mentioned Europeans heading to America's East Coast.
Right. Millions, Irish, Italians, Germans, and others drawn to the industrial jobs in cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia.
And on the other side of the continent.
Chinese immigrants moving to the American West Coast, a large number finding work building the railroads, which were expanding rapidly.
So that's migration to industrial centers. But what about migration within empires, driven by the needs of the empire itself?
Good point. The sources mention British engineers and geologists, for example, highly skilled workers moving to places like India and parts of Africa.
Why them specifically?
Their expertise was needed for building infrastructure railways again, ports, mines, basically, the nuts and bolts of resource extraction and control that underpinned British imperial expansion.
So their migrations supported the imperial project directly. Now that's voluntary migration. But the analysis is clear. Coerced labor was still a major factor, especially early on.
Yes, absolutely. We have to remember the Atlantic slave trade were still operating at the start of this period, 1750, a horrific driver of forced migration.
Though it was banned by many nations later in the period.
Correct. But as the traditional slave trade declined, other forms of coerced or semi-coerced labor often took its place or expanded.
Like convict labor.
Exactly. Britain famously used Australia as a penal colony, and France used places like French Guiana.
So sending prisoners overseas.
It was partly about dealing with crime and crowded prisons back home, but it also provided a source of forced labor for colonial projects, building infrastructure, hard labor, often seen as cheaper than keeping them in prison domestically.
Right. And then there's this other category the sources highlight, semi-coerced labor. Indentured servitude falls under this, right?
Yes, that's a key one.
Can you explain how that worked?
Sure. Essentially, it was a contract. Someone would agree to work for a set number of years, often, say, 3 to 7 years.
In exchange for...
In exchange for their passage being paid to wherever the work was a colony, usually.
And why did this system become so common?
Well, the analysis points to it filling the labor gap, particularly on plantations and in mines, after the abolition of slavery in places like the British Empire. They needed cheap labor, and this was a way to get it.
But semi-coerced. That implies it wasn't always entirely voluntary.
Well, legally, they signed a contract. But the conditions could be incredibly harsh, the terms restrictive, and people signing up were often desperate due to poverty or famine back home. So the power imbalance was huge, and the line between choice and coercion could be very thin.
The sources give examples, like Indian indentured laborers.
Yes. The British facilitated the movement of vast numbers of Indian laborers to places like the Caribbean, Fiji, Mauritius, South Africa, Southeast Asia, working on sugar plantations, railways.
And Chinese laborers, too.
Also utilized by the British, for instance, in the tin mines in Malaysia. often driven by extreme poverty in parts of China.
So, while distinct from slavery, it was still a system often built on exploitation and desperation.
Very much so. It met the demands of the industrializing, colonizing powers for cheap, controllable labor.
It really is a complex web, isn't it? You've got environmental factors like population growth and famine pushing people out.
Then you have technology steamships, railways making mass movement possible like never before.
And overlaying all that are these powerful economic forces, the pull of industrial jobs, the needs of empires, leading to voluntary, coerced, and these semi-coerced forms of migration.
It paints a picture of a world being rapidly drawn together, connected by these flows of people, capital, and goods, but often in very unequal ways.
Individual choices and circumstances were just so caught up in these massive global shifts.
Exactly. Someone leaving Ireland due to famine or Italy for work in Argentina, their personal story is part of this much larger historical process.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear these migrations between 1750 and 1900 fundamentally reshaped the world. The demographics, the cultures of societies everywhere were altered.
Lasting impacts we still see today.
Which makes you think, what are the echoes in today's global migration? We see movement driven by economics, conflict, climate change now.
Some parallels, some new dynamics.
And it prompts that final question for you, the listener. What unseen forces, maybe technological, economic, or environmental, might be shaping the next great waves of human movement across the globe? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.